The first explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence at 4:47 a.m., sending Lieutenant Maya Chen diving behind a concrete barrier as shrapnel whistled overhead. Her pink-cased night vision scope, the one that had earned her 6 months of relentless mockery, pressed against her eye as she scanned the compound below. Through the rose-tinted display, she could see movement, lots of movement. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Contact! Contact! Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio, static punctuating his panic. Multiple hostiles, southeast perimeter, they've got rockets! Maya's breath fogged in the crisp mountain air as she adjusted the scope's settings, her fingers finding the controls by muscle memory, despite the chaos erupting around their forward operating base. The custom pink housing wasn't just for show, though her squadmates had certainly treated it that way. Inside was military-grade thermal imaging technology that she'd modified herself, enhanced with additional filters that could detect heat signatures through smoke and debris better than standard-issue equipment. Another explosion, closer this time. The ground beneath her boots trembled, and somewhere in the darkness, someone screamed. "Chen, where's that Overwatch?" Lieutenant Colonel Barnes's voice cut through the radio chatter, sharp with urgency. "We need eyes on their position, now!" She pressed the scope tighter against her eye, ignoring the way her hands shook slightly. Through the pink-tinted display, the world revealed itself in ghostly detail. The attacking force was larger than they'd anticipated, at least 40 fighters moving in coordinated groups through the rocky terrain. But there was something else, something that made her stomach clench with recognition. "Sir," she spoke into a radio, her voice steadier than she felt, "they're not just attacking the base, they're hurting us." The pattern was unmistakable once she saw it. The explosions, the apparent chaos, it was all designed to drive the base personnel toward the eastern bunkers, toward what they thought was safety. Maya had grown up in a small town outside Denver where her father ran a gun shop and her mother taught high school physics. She'd been the girl who painted her rifle stock lavender for hunting trips, who wore rhinestone-studded combat boots to junior ROTC meetings, who refused to choose between femininity and firepower. Her parents had supported her unconventional approach, understanding that her love of pink and glitter didn't diminish her tactical mind or her shooting accuracy. But the military had been different. From day one at basic training, her fellow recruits had seen her gear modifications as a joke. The pink scope became a symbol of everything they thought was wrong with women in combat roles. Even some of the instructors had rolled their eyes when she'd requested permission to use her personally modified equipment. "Pretty in pink won't save you in a firefight, Chen," Corporal Martinez had sneered during their first joint exercise. "This isn't a fashion show." The mockery had followed her through advanced training, through deployment, through every mission where she'd proven herself capable. They called her scope the makeup mirror. They asked if it came with matching lipstick. They questioned whether she was taking the job seriously. Now, crouched behind concrete as mortar rounds whistled overhead, Maya could see what standard equipment would have missed. The attacking force had positioned themselves in a crescent formation, using the base's own defensive positions against them. They were professional, organized, and definitely not the random insurgent group that intelligence had suggested. "Barnes, this is Chen. They've got us in a kill box. The eastern bunkers. It's a trap." Static answered her for a moment that stretched like eternity. Then, "Explain." Through her scope, Maya tracked movement patterns, counting muzzle flashes and estimating positions. "They're using suppressive fire to channel our people toward what looks like the safest route. But sir, I can see heat signatures positioned along the eastern ravine. If we move the wounded and non-combatants that way, they'll be walking into an ambush." The base housed 89 people that night. Soldiers, contractors, medical staff, and a small group of embedded journalists who'd been documenting their humanitarian mission in the region. Most were now trapped in the central compound, taking cover wherever they could find it as the attack intensified. Maya's best friend, Corporal Lisa Thompson, was somewhere in that chaos. Lisa, who defended Maya's pink gear to anyone who'd listen, who understood that being feminine didn't mean being weak. Lisa, who'd saved up for months to buy her own set of modified equipment after seeing how effective Maya's setup could be. Through the scope, Maya spotted movement near the motor pool. 3 figures in tactical gear, moving too purposefully to be part of the defensive response. She adjusted the thermal settings, filtering out background heat to focus on human signatures. The figures were carrying something, packages that radiated unusual heat signatures. "Sir, we've got sappers near the vehicle depot. They're placing charges." The radio crackled with Barnes's response. "How many?" "3 confirmed, but sir..." Maya swept the scope across the compound, her enhanced optics revealing details that would have been invisible to standard equipment. "This isn't random. They know our layout, our protocols. Someone gave them detailed intelligence." As if to underscore her point, an explosion erupted precisely at the base's primary communications array. The timing was too perfect, the placement too strategic. This wasn't luck or good reconnaissance. This was inside knowledge. Maya's mind raced as she continued scanning. The pink scope that had made her a laughingstock was now revealing the truth of their situation. The attackers weren't just better organized than expected, they were operating with information that should have been classified. Someone had betrayed them. Another mortar round impacted near the medical tent, and Maya could see figures moving inside, wounded being tended to by staff who had no idea they were being herded towards slaughter. Dr. Sarah Kim, the base physician who'd always treated Maya with respect, was visible through the tent's thin walls, working frantically to stabilize casualties. The weight of what she was seeing settled on Maya's shoulders like a physical burden. 89 lives, all depending on decisions made in the next few minutes. All the mockery, all the jokes about her girly gear faded away in the face of that responsibility. She keyed her radio again. "Colonel Barnes, I need you to listen carefully. I can see the full picture from here, and it's worse than we thought. But I think I know how to get our people out." The response came quickly. "I'm listening, Lieutenant." "We can't use the eastern route. It's compromised, but there's a blind spot in their formation, northwest, along the old supply road. My scope's picking up clear thermals in that direction. No hostile signatures for at least 200 meters. That road's been mined for months, Chin. Intelligence confirmed it." Maya adjusted her scope's settings again, cycling through different filters. "Sir, I'm not seeing any buried heat sources along that route. Either the intelligence was wrong, or..." She paused, pieces clicking together in her mind. "Or whoever's feeding them information wanted us to think it was mined." The implication hung in the air between them. If the supply road wasn't actually mined, if that had been disinformation to keep them from using what was actually the safest escape route, then the betrayal went deeper than they had imagined. Through her pink-cased scope, Maya watched as the attacking force tightened their formation. Time was running out. Soon, they'd move to the second phase of whatever operation this was, and the people in the medical tent, the journalists, Lisa, Dr. Kim, all of them would be walking into a carefully prepared killing field. "Colonel," Maya said, her voice cutting through the radio static with newfound authority, "we need to move now. I can guide them out, but only if we trust what my equipment is telling us." The same equipment they'd mocked. The same girly modifications they dismissed as unprofessional. The pink scope that was now their only hope of seeing the truth clearly enough to save 89 lives. Barnes's response would determine whether they lived or died, whether Maya's unconventional approach would finally be vindicated, or whether their last memory would be the sound of laughter at her expense. The scope pressed against her eye, its rose-tinted display revealing secrets that standard equipment would have missed entirely. Somewhere in the distance, another explosion echoed across the mountains, and Maya Chen prepared to prove that being underestimated could be the deadliest mistake an enemy could make. Maya Chen had never intended to become the poster child for controversy in military equipment modification.
Growing up in Lakewood, Colorado, she'd simply been a girl who refused to see the world in the black and white terms that others seemed to prefer. Her bedroom had been a curious mix of tactical manuals and fashion magazines, of disassembled radio equipment and carefully organized makeup palettes. Her father, Master Sergeant retired David Chen, had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old. But it was her mother, Dr. Jennifer Chen, a physics professor at the Colorado School of Mines, who taught her that there was no reason her equipment couldn't be both functional and beautiful. "Pink doesn't make a scope less accurate, sweetheart," her mother had said when Maya first proposed modifying her hunting rifle. "And if it makes you happy to look at, you'll spend more time practicing with it. Better performance through better engagement. That's just good science." The philosophy had carried Maya through high school, where she'd been simultaneously prom queen and captain of the shooting team. She learned early that people expected her to choose, be pretty or be tough, be feminine or be capable. But Maya had always been constitutionally unable to fit into neat categories. Her first day at the forward operating base had set the tone for everything that followed. She'd arrived with her carefully maintained gear, every piece of equipment functioning flawlessly but customized to her preferences. The pink scope was just the most visible example. She'd also modified her rifle sling with custom padding in lavender, added rhinestones to her helmet that served as identification markers in low light, and painted her magazine pouches in a soft rose gold that was both personally meaningful and tactically sound. The color actually provided better camouflage in the desert environment than standard tan. But her squad mates hadn't seen tactical advantage. They'd seen a woman who didn't take the job seriously. "Check out Barbie's gear," Corporal Jake Martinez had announced loudly on her first day, making sure everyone could hear it. "Think she's got a matching purse for her ammo?" The laughter had followed her everywhere. In the mess hall, they'd asked if her MREs came in strawberry flavor. During equipment checks, they'd wondered out loud whether her weapons would still function if they got dirty. In briefings, she'd caught them rolling their eyes when she offered tactical suggestions. The worst part wasn't the mockery itself. Maya had dealt with that her entire life. The worst part was how it affected her ability to do her job effectively. When people didn't take you seriously, they didn't listen to your observations. They didn't trust your judgment. They dismissed your contributions before you even made them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been the exception. A career soldier with 22 years of experience, he'd watched Maya during their first joint exercise and come to a different conclusion than the others. "Chen," he'd said, after she'd successfully called in coordinates that had eliminated 3 simulated enemy positions, "I don't give a damn if your gear is hot pink with purple polka dots. You can shoot, you can spot, and you can think under pressure. That's all that matters to me." But Rodriguez was just one voice among many. And even his support couldn't entirely shield Maya from the constant undertone of derision that followed her through each day. Her friendship with Lisa Thompson had been a lifeline. Lisa, a combat medic from Alabama, had initially been skeptical of Maya's approach, but after working together for 3 months, she'd become Maya's strongest defender. "You know what I love about your gear?" Lisa had said one evening as they cleaned weapons together. "It's not that it's pink, though I admit it's growing on me. It's that it works exactly the way you need it to."
Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been the exception. A career soldier with 22 years of experience, he'd watched Maya during their first joint exercise and come to a different conclusion than the others. "Chen," he'd said after she'd successfully called in coordinates that had eliminated 3 simulated enemy positions, "I don't give a damn if your gear is hot pink with purple polka dots. You can shoot, you can spot, and you can think under pressure. That's all that matters to me." But Rodriguez was just one voice among many, and even his support couldn't entirely shield Maya from the constant undertone of derision that followed her through each day. Her friendship with Corporal Lisa Thompson had been a lifeline. Lisa, a combat medic from Alabama, had initially been skeptical of Maya's approach, but after working together for 3 months, she'd become Maya's strongest defender. "You know what I love about your gear?" Lisa had said one evening as they cleaned weapons together. "It's not that it's pink, though I admit it's growing on me. It's that it works exactly the way you need it to work. You've thought through every modification, tested everything, made sure every change actually improves performance. That's more than most of these guys can say about their standard issue stuff. Lisa had even started making her own modifications, adding small touches of color and personality to her medical kit. Nothing as bold as Maya's pink scope, but enough to signal that she understood the principle. Your gear should reflect who you are, not who others expect you to be. The base's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, had taken a more complicated position. He'd never joined in the mockery, but he'd also never actively defended Maya's choices. During performance reviews, he'd praised her tactical skills and marksmanship while carefully avoiding any mention of her equipment modifications. Lieutenant Chen demonstrates exceptional situational awareness and communication skills, he'd written in her latest evaluation. Her ability to gather and relay intelligence under pressure is among the best I've observed in 15 years of command. But Maya had noticed what he didn't write. No mention of her innovative approaches to equipment modification. No acknowledgement that her personalized gear often outperformed standard issue alternatives. The subtext was clear. He valued her abilities but wished she'd conformed to conventional appearance standards. Dr. Sarah Kim, the base physician, had offered a different perspective during one of their conversations in the medical tent. "You know what I think?" Dr. Kim had said while treating a minor shrapnel wound on Maya's arm from a training accident. "I think they're threatened by the fact that you found a way to be completely yourself while being completely professional. Most people have to compromise one or the other. You've refused to compromise either." The insight had stuck with Maya through the difficult months that followed. She'd begun to understand that the mockery wasn't really about her gear at all. It was about what her gear represented, the refusal to conform, the insistence that effectiveness didn't require sacrificing identity, the demonstration that there were multiple ways to be a good soldier. But understanding the psychology behind the harassment didn't make it easier to endure. Maya found herself second-guessing decisions she'd normally make instinctively. She'd catch herself hesitating before offering tactical suggestions, wondering if they'd be dismissed as girly thinking. She'd started requesting solo assignments more often, partly to prove her competence, but also to avoid the constant background hum of derision. The night before the attack, Maya had been on watch duty with Private First Class Tommy Nguyen, one of the younger soldiers who'd recently arrived at the base. Tommy had been curious about her equipment modifications, asking thoughtful questions rather than making jokes. "Ma'am, can I ask you something? Why do you think it bothers them so much? The pink scope, I mean. It obviously works. I've watched you use it. You spot things other people miss. So what's the real problem?"
Maya had considered the question carefully. "I think," she'd finally said, "it's because it challenges their idea of what strength looks like. They've been taught that to be tough, you have to reject anything that might be seen as feminine. But I grew up believing that real strength means being completely yourself, regardless of what others expect." Tommy had nodded thoughtfully. "My sister's like that. She's in engineering school, and she gets the same kind of comments about her study materials. She decorates everything with stickers and bright colors, and people assume she's not serious about her work, but she's got the highest GPA in her class." The conversation had stayed with Maya through the night. It reminded her that the next generation might see things differently, that change was possible even in institutions resistant to it. Now, crouched behind concrete with explosions echoing around her, Maya realized that all those months of mockery had prepared her for this moment in an unexpected way. She'd learned to trust her own judgment even when others dismissed it. She'd developed confidence in her equipment and her abilities despite constant criticism. She'd grown comfortable being underestimated. Through her pink scope, she could see details that would save lives, if anyone was willing to listen to the woman with the girly gear. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same equipment that had made her a target for ridicule might now be their only hope for survival. The radio crackled with urgent communications as the attack intensified. Maya adjusted her scope settings and prepared to prove once and for all that effectiveness had nothing to do with conforming to others' expectations of what a soldier should look like. The radio silence that followed Maya's assessment stretched for 12 seconds.
She counted each one while explosions continued to light up the pre-dawn darkness around their besieged forward operating base. Through her pink scope, she watched heat signatures moving with military precision through positions that should have been unknown to any hostile force. "Chen," Lieutenant Colonel Barnes finally responded, his voice tight with the kind of control that comes from years of making impossible decisions. "You're certain about that supply road?" "Sir, I've been monitoring it for 20 minutes. No buried heat sources, no movement, no indication of recent ground disturbance that would suggest mining. Either our intelligence was compromised or deliberately false." Another explosion, this one close enough to shower their position with debris. Maya ducked instinctively, then immediately returned to her scope. Through the rose-tinted display, she could see the attacking force executing a textbook herding operation using measured bursts of fire to drive the base personnel toward predetermined kill zones. "Movement in the medical tent. Dr. Kim is evacuating wounded toward the eastern bunkers. Sir, we need to redirect them now." The eastern bunkers represented everything wrong with their current situation. What looked like the safest route, reinforced positions with good cover and established defensive fields of fire, was exactly where the enemy wanted them to go. Maya could see the trap laid out like a tactical diagram through her enhanced optics. Concealed positions along the ravine, overlapping fields of fire, carefully placed explosive charges that would turn their refuge into a killing ground. All stations, Barnes's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Change of plans. Eastern route is compromised. Repeat, eastern route is compromised."
Maya heard confusion in the responding voices. Sergeant Williams from the motor pool. "Sir, eastern route has been our primary egress for 6 months. It's the most fortified position we have." From the communications tent, Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through static. "Colonel, we've got wounded who can't move fast. Eastern bunkers are their best chance." "Negative," Barnes replied firmly. "Chen has eyes on hostile positions. Eastern route is a trap. All personnel prepare for northwest evacuation along the old supply road." The response was immediate and predictable. Maya heard doubt, confusion, and barely concealed frustration in the voices that responded to Barnes's orders. They were being asked to abandon their most defensible position and move along a route that had been considered dangerous for months, all based on the assessment of a lieutenant whose judgment many of them had questioned for half a year. "Northwest route's been mined to hell," came Corporal Martinez's voice. "Intelligence confirmed it months ago." Maya keyed her radio. "Martinez, this is Chen. I'm looking at that route right now through thermal optics. No heat signatures indicating buried ordnance. No recent ground disturbance. Either the mining reports were wrong or someone wanted us to think it was impassable." The silence that followed was different from Barnes's earlier pause. This was the sound of people processing information that didn't fit their preconceptions, trying to reconcile what they thought they knew with what they were being told by someone they'd systematically dismissed for half a year. Through her scope, Maya watched the enemy force adjust their positions. They were reacting to the radio traffic, which meant they were monitoring communications. The betrayal went deeper than she had initially suspected. "All stations," she broadcast on an emergency frequency. "Switch to secondary encryption. Our planetary comms are compromised." The response came from multiple sources simultaneously, overlapping voices creating a chaos of confusion and growing panic. But underneath the noise, Maya heard something else, the sound of people beginning to trust her judgment despite months of ridicule. Dr. Kim's voice came through clearly on the medical channel. "Chen, this is Kim. I've got 7 wounded who can't move under their own power. If we're going northwest, I need time to prepare transport." "Doc, how long do you need?" "Give me 10 minutes." Maya swept her scope across the compound, tracking enemy movements and calculating timing. "You've got 8 minutes. After that, they'll be in position to cut off both routes. The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos as the base personnel prepared for an evacuation that violated every protocol they'd established. Maya provided overwatch, calling out enemy positions and movement patterns as the scattered defenders organized themselves into something resembling an organized withdrawal. But the real conflict wasn't with the external enemy, it was with the doubt and resistance from within their own ranks. "Chen, this is Martinez. You better be right about this. If you're wrong, you're getting a lot of good people killed." Maya felt the weight of that accusation, but she also felt something else. A clarity that comes from finally being in a situation where your skills are desperately needed. "Chen, I've been right about threat assessment for 6 months, but nobody wanted to listen because they were too busy making jokes about my equipment. I'm right about this, too." Through her scope, Maya could see the first group of evacuees beginning to move toward the northwest route. Dr. Kim had organized the wounded onto improvised stretchers, with Lisa Thompson and 2 other medics providing support. They moved carefully but quickly, understanding that their survival depended on reaching the supply road before the enemy completed their encirclement. "First group is moving," Maya reported. "I've got clear sight lines for another 3 minutes, then they'll be in defilade behind the ridge." As she watched, Maya noticed something that made her stomach tighten with recognition. One of the evacuees, Private Johnson from the supply section, was moving wrong. His heat signature was different, his posture too alert for someone supposedly following evacuation orders.
"Barnes, we've got a problem. Johnson's not evacuating with the others. He's moving toward the communications array." There was a pause before Barnes responded. "Johnson's our backup comms operator. He's probably trying to establish contact with headquarters." Maya adjusted her scope settings, filtering the display to focus on Johnson's specific heat signature. What she saw confirmed her growing suspicions. "Sir, Johnson's carrying something. Heat signature suggests electronic equipment but not standard radio gear." The implication hit both of them simultaneously. Johnson wasn't trying to establish communications. He was the one who'd been compromising them. "All stations," Barnes broadcast on the emergency frequency, "detain Private Johnson immediately. He is not authorized to access communications equipment." But Johnson had heard the transmission. Through her scope, Maya watched him abandon subtlety and begin running toward the communications array. He was carrying a device that would likely allow him to coordinate the final phase of the attack, turning their attempted evacuation into a massacre. "He's running," Maya reported. 200 meters from the comm array. I can take the shot." The words hung in the air. Maya had clear sight lines, perfect conditions, and the modified scope that would make the shot possible even in the pre-dawn darkness. But taking that shot would mean killing a fellow soldier, someone she'd served alongside for months. "Sir, Johnson is carrying something. Heat signature suggests electronic equipment but not standard radio gear." The implication hit both of them simultaneously. Johnson wasn't trying to establish communications. He was the one who'd been compromising them. "All stations," Barnes broadcast on the emergency frequency, "detain Private Johnson immediately. He is not authorized to access communications equipment." But Johnson had heard the transmission. Through her scope, Maya watched him abandon subtlety and begin running toward the communications array. He was carrying a device that would likely allow him to coordinate the final phase of the attack, turning their attempted evacuation into a massacre. "He's running," Maya reported. 200 meters from the comm array. I can take the shot." The words hung in the air. Maya had clear sight lines, perfect conditions, and the modified scope that would make the shot possible even in the pre-dawn darkness. But taking that shot would mean ending the life of someone she'd eaten meals with, someone whose hometown she knew, someone whose betrayal was about to cost 89 lives. "Clean shot confirmed. But sir, if I'm wrong about Johnson, if you're wrong about Johnson, we're all dead anyway. If he reaches that array and coordinates their final assault, none of us are walking out of here." Through her scope, Maya watched Johnson close the distance to the communications array. In 30 seconds, he'd be in position to contact the attacking force and direct them to the evacuation route. All the people moving toward what they hoped was safety would be walking into prepared positions. Lisa Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. "Maya, whatever you're going to do it fast. We're completely exposed out here." Maya took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of her career. The pink scope that had earned her 6 months of ridicule was about to save 89 lives, but only if she had the courage to pull the trigger on someone wearing the same uniform she was. The single rifle shot that ended Private Johnson's betrayal echoed across the mountain valley like a judgment, and for a moment, even the attacking force seemed to pause. Maya kept her eye pressed to the pink scope, watching Johnson's heat signature fade from bright yellow to dull red as his body temperature dropped. She'd made the right call. The device he'd been carrying was clearly visible now, its electronic components still radiating heat against the cool ground. "Target down," Maya reported, her voice steadier than she felt. "Johnson won't be coordinating anything." Through her enhanced optics, she could see the immediate effect of Johnson's elimination on the attacking force. Their movement patterns changed from coordinated precision to something approaching confusion. Without their inside intelligence, they were operating partially blind. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes' voice came through with a mix of relief and grim satisfaction. "Outstanding work, Jen. First group, continue northwest evacuation. Second group, prepare to move in 2 minutes."
But Maya was already tracking new developments through her scope. "Sir, we've got movement from the enemy positions. They're repositioning rapidly. Looks like they're trying to adapt to the loss of their intelligence source." What she was seeing through the pink-tinted display would have been invisible to standard night vision equipment. The thermal imaging modifications she'd made allowed her to track heat signatures through smoke, dust, and debris that was now clouding the battlefield. Where conventional optics would show only chaos, Maya's scope revealed patterns of tactical movement and strategic decision-making. "Chen," came Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice. "I'm with the 2nd Evacuation Group. Can you see the route ahead?" Maya swept her scope along the northwest path, checking for any signs of hostile positioning. "Clear for the next 300 meters. No heat signatures, no movement. Rodriguez, when you move, keep the group tight. I'll provide overwatch, but you'll be exposed for about 90 seconds crossing the open ground." As the second group began their movement, Maya noticed something that made her pause. The attacking force wasn't just repositioning, they were retreating. Not falling back to secondary positions, but actually withdrawing from the engagement entirely. "Barnes, something's wrong. The hostiles are pulling back." "Explain." Maya tracked multiple heat signatures moving away from the compound in organized groups. "They're not regrouping for another assault. They're leaving. This whole attack, it was designed around having Johnson coordinate the final phase. Without him, they don't have a viable operational plan." The implication was stunning. The entire assault had been built around the betrayal, around having insider knowledge to guide the enemy forces to maximum effect. Without Johnson's intelligence and coordination, the attack lost its strategic purpose. Dr. Kim's voice cut through the radio chatter. "All wounded are secure and moving. Chen, I don't know how you spotted that route, but you saved lives tonight." "Ma'am, that's what the gear is for." As the evacuation continued, Maya began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Johnson's betrayal hadn't been opportunistic. It had been the centerpiece of a carefully planned operation. The attack, the timing, the specific tactical approach, all of it had been designed to maximize casualties by herding the base personnel into prepared kill zones. Through her scope, Maya could see the evidence scattered across the battlefield. The explosive charges positioned along the eastern route were sophisticated military-grade ordnance that would have turned our primary defensive positions into death traps. The attacking force carried equipment that suggested significant financial backing and professional training. This hadn't been a random insurgent action. It had been a coordinated assault with specific objectives. "Barnes, we need to secure Johnson's position. Whatever intelligence he was providing, there might be evidence of how deep this goes."
Rodriguez, take a team to Johnson's position. Document everything before we finish the evacuation. As Rodriguez's team moved toward the fallen traitor, Maya continued providing overwatch for the ongoing evacuation. Through her pink scope, she watched the last groups of base personnel moving along the supply road that everyone had believed was mined. The route was not only clear, it was the safest possible path away from the compound.
Lisa Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. "Maya, we're clear of the immediate danger zone. All wounded accounted for, all medical supplies secured. Whatever you did back there, it worked." But Maya was tracking new information through her scope. "Lisa, I'm seeing vehicle movement about 2 kilometers northwest. Looks like our people are about to make contact with a convoy." The heat signatures were clearly military vehicles, approaching from the direction of the main base. Either reinforcements were arriving, or the evacuation was about to encounter additional hostile forces. "Barnes, we've got vehicles approaching the evacuation route. I count 4, possibly 5 separate signatures. They're moving fast." There was tension in Barnes's voice when he responded. "Chen, can you identify them as friendly?" Maya adjusted her scope settings, trying to gather more detailed information about the approaching vehicles. The thermal signatures were consistent with military transport, but that didn't necessarily mean they were friendly forces. "Negative identification at this range, sir, but their approach pattern suggests coordination with our evacuation timing. Someone knew where we were going and when we'd be there." The implication sent a chill through the radio network. If Johnson had been passing information to hostile forces, how many other people might be compromised? How deep did the betrayal go? Rodriguez's voice came through from Johnson's position. "Colonel, you need to see this. Johnson had a complete communication setup here. Radio, satellite uplink, encrypted data transmission equipment. This wasn't improvised. He's been operating a full intelligence station." Maya continued tracking the approaching vehicles while processing Rodriguez's report. Johnson hadn't just been passing information, he'd been running a comprehensive spy operation from within their own base. "Sir," Maya called, "the vehicles are slowing down. They're in position to intercept our evacuation route, but they're not moving to surround or engage. I think they might be friendly." Through her scope, she watched the lead vehicle stop and deploy personnel. The heat signatures moved with military discipline, but their positions suggested they were establishing security rather than preparing for combat. "Barnes, we've got vehicles approaching the evacuation route. I count 4, possibly 5 separate signatures. They're moving fast." Barnes's voice carried relief when he responded. "Chen, you've just spotted our extraction team. Command sent reinforcements as soon as they lost contact with the base. Your assessment of the supply road was correct. They've been using it to approach our position." As the evacuation merged with the arriving reinforcements, Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that everyone was safe, satisfaction that her tactical assessments had been proven correct, but also a deep sadness at the cost of validation. It had taken a life-or-death situation to demonstrate that her unconventional approach was not only valid, but superior to standard procedures. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the commanding officer of the extraction team, established communications with Maya directly. "Captain, I have complete overwatch of the compound and surrounding area. All enemy forces have retreated. The immediate threat is neutralized." As the combined force prepared to move toward the main base, Maya heard something she'd never heard before in 6 months of service: genuine respect in the voices discussing her performance. The mockery was gone, replaced by acknowledgement that her girly gear had provided capabilities that standard equipment couldn't match. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her position, his voice carrying a tone of professional admiration. "Chen, I've been in combat for 15 years, and I've never seen tactical intelligence gathering like what you did tonight. That scope of yours, whatever modifications you made, they work." Maya smiled for the first time since the attack began. "Sergeant, it's not just the scope. It's about having equipment that you trust completely, that you've customized to work exactly the way you need it to work. When your gear is an extension of yourself, you can do things that seem impossible with standard equipment. The lesson would resonate far beyond this single engagement. But for now, Maya Chen was content to have proven that being underestimated could be a tactical advantage, and that effectiveness had nothing to do with conforming to others' expectations.
3 days after the attack, Maya found herself sitting in a sterile conference room at the regional command headquarters, facing a panel of senior officers who were struggling to reconcile the official reports with their preconceptions about equipment standards and battlefield effectiveness. Her pink scope sat on the table between them, no longer an object of ridicule, but something approaching reverence, and that shift in perception carried its own complicated weight. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the commanding officer for the regional sector, held up a thick folder containing testimony from every member of the base who'd survived the attack. "Lieutenant Chen, I have 89 statements here, and they all tell the same story. Your tactical assessment and equipment modifications prevented what our intelligence analysts are now calling a potential massacre." Maya shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The attention felt strange after months of being dismissed or ignored. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job with the equipment I trust most." "About that equipment," interrupted Major General Robert Stone, a career officer whose skepticism was written clearly across his weathered features. "These modifications you've made, they haven't been tested or approved through proper channels. How do we know they meet military specifications?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya recognized the familiar pattern. Even now, even after the results spoke for themselves, there were those who were more concerned with conformity than effectiveness. Captain Walsh, who'd led the extraction team, leaned forward. "Sir, if I may, the results speak for themselves. Lieutenant Chen's equipment provided tactical intelligence that standard-issue optics couldn't have gathered. She identified enemy positions, detected the trap at the eastern bunkers, found the safe evacuation route, and spotted the traitor before he could complete his mission. Her modifications didn't just meet specifications, they exceeded them." Maya felt a flush of gratitude toward Captain Walsh, but she also recognized an opportunity to address the larger issue. "General Stone, with respect, the question isn't whether my modifications meet current specifications. The question is whether current specifications are adequate for the threats we're actually facing." She gestured toward her scope. "This equipment incorporates enhanced thermal filtering, improved resolution algorithms, and custom software that I developed based on actual field conditions. I didn't make these changes to be different, I made them to be more effective." Colonel Hendricks studied the scope with the intensity of someone trying to understand a foreign language. "Lieutenant, walk us through exactly what your modifications accomplish that standard equipment doesn't." Maya stood and moved to the scope, her confidence growing as she shifted into instructor mode. "Ma'am, standard night vision provides adequate imaging under ideal conditions, but in combat, conditions are never ideal. You've got smoke, dust, debris, multiple heat sources creating interference." She pointed to the custom housing that had earned so much mockery. "This isn't just aesthetic. The housing incorporates additional shielding that reduces electromagnetic interference. The pink color isn't random either. It's a specific shade that provides optimal visibility in desert environments while maintaining a professional appearance." "Professional appearance?" "Sir, the standard tan color actually stands out more than this shade in the specific light conditions we encounter during dawn and dusk operations. I tested 17 different color options before settling on this one. It provides better camouflage while serving as a psychological tool." "Psychological tool?"
Maya smiled slightly. "Sir, when people underestimate your capabilities based on appearances, they often reveal information they wouldn't otherwise share. The scope has been tactically useful, partly because enemies didn't perceive it as a serious threat." The room fell silent as the implications of that statement settled in. Maya had turned the mockery into an operational advantage. Dr. Sarah Kim,
who'd been called to testify about the medical aspects of the evacuation, spoke up from her position at the side of the room. If I may add something, the psychological factor worked internally as well. Lieutenant Chen's willingness to maintain her personal identity while performing at the highest professional level created a different kind of confidence in the unit. People started believing that they could be effective without conforming to narrow stereotypes. Colonel Hendricks nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Kim, you're suggesting that Lieutenant Chen's approach had broader implications for unit effectiveness? Absolutely. I watched morale improve as people realized that professional competence didn't require sacrificing personal identity. Corporal Thompson started making her own equipment modifications. Private Nguyen began incorporating techniques from his civilian electronics background. When you stop trying to fit everyone into the same mold, you often discover capabilities you didn't know existed. Maya felt a surge of pride hearing Dr. Kim's assessment, but she also recognized the weight of responsibility that came with it. Her choices had influenced others, created ripple effects that extended far beyond her individual performance. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd been quiet throughout most of the briefing, finally spoke. General Stone, I've been in the Army for 22 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers come and go. Lieutenant Chen's equipment modifications are impressive, but that's not what makes her exceptional. What makes her exceptional is that she had the courage to trust her own judgment even when everyone around her was telling her she was wrong. The statement carried particular weight coming from Rodriguez, whose reputation for straight talk and tactical expertise was well established throughout the command structure. Colonel Hendricks cleared his throat. If I may, I'd like to address the broader implications of what happened at the forward operating base. We've completed our investigation into Private Johnson's activities, and what we've discovered is deeply concerning. Maya turned her attention to Barnes, curious about what the investigation had revealed. Johnson had been providing intelligence to hostile forces for at least 3 months. He had access to patrol schedules, supply convoys, personnel assignments, and defensive preparations. The attack on our base was just one operation in what appears to be a broader intelligence-gathering effort. Major General Stone leaned forward. How extensive was the compromise? Sir, Johnson's communication equipment included data on 7 other forward operating bases in the region. If Lieutenant Chen hadn't identified him when she did, we could have been looking at coordinated attacks across multiple installations. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. Maya realized that her split-second decision to take the shot had prevented not just the immediate massacre at their base, but potentially dozens of other attacks. Colonel Hendricks studied Maya with new intensity. Lieutenant, when you identified Johnson as a threat, what made you certain enough to recommend lethal action? Maya considered the question carefully. Ma'am, it wasn't just one thing. It was the pattern of his movement, the heat signature of the equipment he was carrying, his positioning relative to our communication array, and the timing of his actions relative to the enemy's tactical adjustments. My scope provided the detailed information, but the analysis required understanding how all those factors connected. Could a soldier using standard equipment have made the same assessment?
Possibly, ma'am, but not with the same confidence level. The enhanced thermal imaging allowed me to see details that would have been ambiguous with standard optics. When you're making a decision that involves taking a life, you need to be absolutely certain. Captain Walsh nodded. That certainty saved 89 lives. As the briefing continued, Maya began to understand that she was witnessing something larger than a simple after-action review. The military was being forced to confront questions about innovation, individuality, and the balance between conformity and effectiveness. 3 weeks later, Maya received orders that would change the trajectory of her career. She was being transferred to the Army's Equipment Development Center, where she would lead a team focused on personalizing military equipment to individual soldier needs and capabilities. The transfer came with a promotion to captain and a mandate that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier: develop protocols for allowing soldiers to modify their equipment based on personal preferences and tactical requirements, while maintaining safety and effectiveness standards. Lisa Thompson was among the first to volunteer for the new program. "Maya," she said during their farewell conversation, "you proved that being different isn't weakness, it's a competitive advantage. Now you get to help other people discover their own advantages." The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her pink scope, which had made her a target for ridicule, had ultimately created an opportunity to change how the military thought about individual expression and tactical effectiveness. On her last day at the forward operating base, Maya stood on the same ridge where she'd provided overwatch during the attack. The compound below showed signs of reconstruction, but also signs of change. Several soldiers were now using modified equipment, and the culture of mockery that had once dominated the base had been replaced by something approaching curiosity about individual approaches to tactical challenges. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found her there, carrying a package wrapped in olive drab canvas. "Chen, the squad wanted you to have this." Maya unwrapped the package to find a custom scope case designed to fit her pink optics perfectly. But it wasn't the case itself that moved her. It was the inscription engraved on the brass nameplate: "To Captain Chen, who taught us that being underestimated is the best tactical advantage of all." As Maya prepared to begin the next phase of her career, she realized that the real victory hadn't been saving 89 lives, though that remained the most important outcome. The real victory had been proving that innovation often comes from the margins, from people who refuse to conform to conventional expectations. Her pink scope had become more than a tool. It had become a symbol of the idea that effectiveness and individuality not only could coexist, but could enhance each other in ways that neither could achieve alone. The lessons learned during that pre-dawn firefight would influence military equipment policy for years to come. But for Maya, the most important lesson was simpler: trust your instincts, invest in your capabilities, and never apologize for being exactly who you are. 2 years later, Captain Maya Chen stood before a class of 30 junior officers at the Army's new Tactical Innovation Center, her original pink scope mounted in a place of honor behind her desk, alongside dozens of other examples of successfully modified equipment. The transformation of military culture hadn't happened overnight, but the ripple effects of that dawn firefight continued to expand in ways she'd never anticipated.
The pink scope that had started as a personal preference had become a symbol of a larger truth: that excellence often emerges from the margins, from people who have the courage to trust their own judgment even when others question their approach. 20 years later, General Maya Chen, now serving as the Army's Chief Innovation Officer, sat in her Pentagon office reviewing applications for the annual Individual Excellence Awards. The program, which recognized soldiers who'd made significant contributions through personalized approaches to tactical challenges, had grown to include nominees from every branch of service and allied militaries around the world. This year's nominees included a Navy pilot who developed custom helmet modifications that improved spatial awareness in combat situations, a Marine engineer who'd created adaptive tools for battlefield construction, and an Air Force communications specialist who'd revolutionized encrypted radio protocols through individual equipment modifications. But the application that caught Maya's attention came from a young Army lieutenant named Isabella Martinez, the daughter of the same Corporal Martinez who'd once mocked Maya's pink scope. Lieutenant Martinez had developed a series of equipment modifications designed specifically for soldiers with sensory processing differences, creating tactical gear that worked better for people whose neurological makeup differed from standard assumptions. Her innovations had improved performance not just for soldiers with diagnosed conditions, but for anyone whose sensory preferences didn't match conventional expectations. "The principle that guided my work," Martinez had written in her application,
came from studying the career of General Chen. She taught the military that effectiveness comes from matching equipment to individual capabilities, not from forcing individuals to adapt to standardized equipment. I wanted to extend that principle to soldiers whose capabilities had been overlooked or undervalued. Maya smiled as she read the application. The next generation was building on principles she'd helped establish, extending them in directions she'd never imagined. Her assistant knocked on the office door. "General, you have a call from Colonel Thompson at Walter Reed." Maya picked up the phone to hear Lisa's familiar voice, now seasoned by 2 decades of medical practice, but still carrying the warmth that had sustained their friendship through challenging times. "Maya, I wanted to let you know that we just completed our first surgery using equipment based on your original modification principles. We saved a soldier who would have died with conventional surgical tools. The personalized equipment made procedures possible that simply couldn't have been done otherwise." "Maya, that's incredible. Tell me about it." "The patient had injuries that required us to work in extremely confined spaces with minimal lighting. We used surgical equipment that had been modified based on the surgeon's specific hand configuration and visual preferences. The improvements in precision and speed were dramatic." Maya felt the familiar satisfaction that came from knowing that principles she'd fought to establish were continuing to save lives in ways she'd never anticipated. "You know what the best part is?" Lisa continued. "The surgical team included the patient's daughter, a young Army medic who's been working on her own equipment modifications. She was able to assist in ways that wouldn't have been possible with standard gear. 3 generations of innovation coming together to save a life." After the call ended, Maya walked to her office window, which looked out over the Potomac River toward Arlington National Cemetery. Somewhere in that vast field of white stones lay soldiers who might have lived if the military had been more open to individual innovation earlier in its history. But Maya had learned not to dwell on missed opportunities. Instead, she focused on the future, on the thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are now encouraged to think creatively about their equipment, their tactics, and their approaches to serving their country. The pink scope that had started everything sat in a place of honor in the Smithsonian Institution's military history collection, accompanied by a placard that read, "This modified scope, used by then-Lieutenant Maya Chen during a 2025 firefight, represents a turning point in military thinking about individual identity and institutional effectiveness. The equipment modifications that made Chen a target for ridicule ultimately saved 89 lives and sparked a revolution in how the military approaches innovation and personalization."
Equipment personalization isn't about self-expression, Maya explained to the attentive faces before her. It's about optimizing the human-machine interface to achieve maximum tactical effectiveness. When your gear is truly tailored to your capabilities and preferences, you can perform at levels that seem impossible with standard-issue equipment. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, no relation to the Corporal Martinez who'd once mocked Maya's modifications, raised her hand. "Ma'am, what about unit standardization? How do we maintain logistical efficiency if everyone's using different equipment?" Maya smiled, recognizing the question she'd answered hundreds of times over the past 2 years. "Excellent question, Martinez. The key is understanding the difference between standardization and uniformity. We can maintain standard performance requirements while allowing individual approaches to meeting those requirements." She gestured toward a display case containing examples of student modifications. Lieutenant Thompson here modified her radio headset with custom padding that accommodates her specific ear configuration, improving communication clarity by 30%. Captain Rodriguez developed a magazine pouch design that works better for left-handed shooters. Sergeant Kim created a compass housing that's easier to read for people with color blindness. The examples represented hundreds of small innovations that had emerged from Maya's program. Each modification was tested, documented, and evaluated for broader application. Some became standard options available to all soldiers. Others remained individual solutions to specific challenges. But the impact extended far beyond equipment modifications. The most important thing we've learned, Maya continued, is that when you encourage people to think critically about their tools, they start thinking critically about their tactics, their strategies, their assumptions about what's possible. After class, Maya walked across the base to visit the memorial garden that had been established to honor the 89 people whose lives had been saved during the attack. The garden featured native plants from each survivor's home state, creating a living testament to the value of individual diversity within institutional unity. Dr. Sarah Kim, now Colonel Kim and the base's chief medical officer, joined Maya on her regular walk through the garden. "Any word from Lisa?" Dr. Kim asked. Maya smiled. "She's doing amazing. Her modified medical kits are now standard equipment for forward medics, and she just got accepted to medical school. She says she wants to specialize in trauma surgery with a focus on developing equipment that works better for field conditions." Lisa Thompson's trajectory represented one of many career transformations that had followed the attack. The validation of individual innovation had opened doors for dozens of soldiers who'd previously felt constrained by conventional approaches. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been promoted to Sergeant Major and now ran the Equipment Testing Division. His initial skepticism had transformed into passionate advocacy for personalized gear, and his testing protocols had become the standard for evaluating modifications across all service branches. Even Corporal Martinez, the original source of much mockery, had undergone his own transformation. After seeing the effectiveness of Maya's approach, he'd developed his own modifications focused on improving equipment for soldiers with mobility limitations. His innovations had been adopted throughout the military's adaptive equipment program. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Dr. Kim said as they paused beside the memorial fountain. "How different things might have been if people had listened to you from the beginning, instead of waiting for a crisis to prove your point."
Maya considered the question. "I used to think about that too, but I've come to believe that resistance might have been necessary. If people had accepted my modifications immediately, they might not have understood why personalization matters. The struggle forced me to articulate the principles behind what I was doing, and that articulation became the foundation for everything that followed." As they continued walking, Maya reflected on the broader changes that had occurred since her program began. Military recruitment had improved as word spread that individual identity and institutional service were no longer seen as mutually exclusive. Retention rates had increased as soldiers felt more empowered to contribute their unique capabilities. Innovation metrics across all equipment categories had improved dramatically. But perhaps most importantly, the culture of mockery and conformity pressure had been replaced by something approaching curiosity and respect for different approaches to common challenges. 5 years later, Maya, now Major Chen and director of the Army's Individual Effectiveness Initiative, received a call that would bring her full circle to where her story began. "Ma'am," came the voice of her aide, "we've got a situation developing at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. They're requesting consultation on tactical assessment capabilities." The irony of the name wasn't lost on Maya. Phoenix, rising from ashes, transformation through destruction, new life from seeming death. What's the nature of the situation? "Ma'am, they're dealing with a potential insider threat situation. Their standard surveillance equipment isn't providing sufficient detail for threat assessment, and they've requested assistance from someone with expertise in enhanced tactical optics." Maya was on a helicopter to Phoenix within 2 hours, carrying a kit that included not just her original pink scope, now a carefully maintained piece of military history, but also third-generation equipment that incorporated lessons learned from hundreds of field modifications. The commanding officer at Phoenix, Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Walsh, the same Captain Walsh who'd led Maya's extraction 5 years earlier, met her at the landing zone. "Maya," Walsh said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming. We've got a situation that reminds me a lot of what we dealt with at your old base." As they walked toward the command center, Walsh explained the details.
Intelligence suggested that someone at the base was providing information to hostile forces, but conventional surveillance hadn't been able to identify the source of the leak. We need someone who can see patterns that others miss, someone who understands that the most important intelligence often comes from noticing things that seem insignificant. Maya smiled. Colonel, I've got 30 students back at the Innovation Center who could handle this mission. The skills aren't unique to me anymore. Maybe not, Walsh replied, but you're the one who proved they work. And honestly, having you here sends a message about how seriously we take individual initiative and innovation.
Together, they formed a network of enhanced capability that would have been impossible under the old system of rigid standardization. Maya, came Santos's voice over the radio, I'm picking up anomalous heat signatures near the supply depot. Someone's moving equipment after hours. Through her scope, Maya could see what Santos was tracking. Confirmed. Park, are you monitoring communications from that area? Affirmative, came Park's reply. I'm detecting encrypted data bursts that coincide with the movement Santos identified. Within 2 hours, they'd identified not just the insider threat, but the entire network of compromised personnel and the external contacts they've been serving. The investigation that followed revealed a intelligence operation that had been years in development, potentially compromising multiple installations across the region. But for Maya, the most satisfying aspect of the mission wasn't the successful identification of a threat. It was watching her former students apply the principles she taught them, using equipment they'd modified according to their own capabilities and preferences, working together in ways that maximized each person's individual strengths. 10 years later, Maya, now Colonel Chen and commander of the Army's Tactical Innovation Command, stood in the same memorial garden where she'd walked with Dr. Kim years earlier. But today, she wasn't alone. Dozens of soldiers, from privates to generals, had gathered for the 10th anniversary ceremony commemorating the attack that had changed everything. Lisa Thompson, now Dr. Thompson, and a leading trauma surgeon, had flown in from Johns Hopkins Hospital, where she headed a research program developing personalized medical equipment for combat environments. Sergeant Major Rodriguez, weeks away from retirement, had brought his entire extended family, including his daughter Ashley, now a major running her own innovation program. Dr. Kim, recently promoted to Brigadier General and serving as the Army's Chief Medical Officer, delivered remarks about the broader implications of the incident. 10 years ago, she said to the assembled crowd, 89 people survived an attack because one young lieutenant refused to accept that effectiveness required conformity. Today, thousands of soldiers serve more effectively because they've learned that individual identity and institutional excellence not only can coexist, they're stronger together than either could be alone. As the ceremony concluded, Maya walked among the memorial plants, each representing a life that had been saved by her willingness to trust her own judgment despite institutional pressure to conform. Near the fountain, she encountered a young private she didn't recognize, a woman carrying equipment that was clearly modified, but done so with a confident professionalism that had become standard in the modern military. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. I know you probably don't remember me, but you spoke at my basic training graduation. You said that the military needs people who think differently, not people who think the same. That speech changed how I approached my entire career. Maya studied the young soldier's gear, noting innovations she'd never seen before. Private, what's your specialty? Cybersecurity, ma'am. I've been working on modifications that integrate digital and physical surveillance capabilities. My equipment looks different because it has to do things that standard equipment wasn't designed for. And how do your supervisors feel about your modifications? The private smiled. Ma'am, they encourage it. They say innovation comes from people who aren't afraid to be different. They tell us that being underestimated can be our greatest tactical advantage. As Maya listened to the young soldier describe her work, she realized that the real victory hadn't been preventing a single attack or saving 89 lives, though those remained critically important. The real victory had been proving that institutions could change, that individual identity and collective effectiveness could enhance each other, and that innovation often comes from people who refuse to fit into conventional categories.
But for Maya, the real monument wasn't in a museum. It was in the daily reality of a military that had learned to value individual differences as sources of strength rather than challenges to overcome. 30 years later. Maya Chen, now retired as a four-star general, but continuing to serve as a consultant on military innovation, stood before the latest class of cadets at West Point. At 68, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime proving that unconventional approaches could yield extraordinary results. "Before I conclude today's lecture," she said to the young faces before her, "I want to tell you about a scope that changed everything." She gestured toward a display case containing her original pink-cased night vision equipment, now a permanent part of the Academy's collection. This scope was mocked for 6 months. People called it unprofessional, questioned whether I was serious about my career, suggested that I cared more about appearance than effectiveness. They were wrong about everything except one thing. I did care deeply about appearance. I cared that my equipment should reflect who I was as a person and a soldier. A cadet raised her hand. "Ma'am, how did you maintain confidence in your approach when everyone around you was criticizing it?" Maya smiled, recognizing herself in the young woman's question. "Cadet, the most important thing I learned is that external validation feels good, but it's not what sustains you through difficult times. What sustains you is the knowledge that you're doing your absolute best work using methods that align with your authentic self." Another cadet spoke up. "General, what advice would you give to someone who wants to innovate but is afraid of standing out?" "Stand out anyway," Maya replied without hesitation. "The military needs people who think differently. It needs people who question assumptions, who approach problems from unexpected angles, who refuse to accept that 'we've always done it this way' is a sufficient justification for anything." She paused, looking out at the young faces that represented the future of military leadership. "But remember, being different isn't valuable just because it's different. It's valuable when it makes you more effective. Everything I did with my equipment was designed to improve my performance. The pink color, the custom housing, the modified software, all of it was about becoming a better soldier." As the lecture concluded, Maya was approached by a young cadet whose equipment showed signs of thoughtful modification. "Ma'am, I've been working on some changes to my gear, but I'm worried about how my instructors will react." Maya examined the cadet's modifications with the eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating innovative approaches. "These look well thought out. Have you tested them thoroughly?" "Yes, ma'am. They improve my performance in night operations by about 20%. "Then you have nothing to worry about. Good modifications speak for themselves. The key is being able to articulate why you made each change and how it improves your effectiveness." As Maya walked across the West Point campus later that day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a mocked lieutenant with unconventional equipment to a general whose innovations had influenced military doctrine worldwide. The real victory, she realized, hadn't been proving that her pink scope worked, although that had been critically important. The real victory had been proving that institutions could evolve, that individual identity and collective effectiveness could enhance each other, and that the courage to be authentic in the face of criticism could literally save lives. Final flash forward.
50 years after that dawn firefight, the Maya Chen Center for Military Innovation at the Army War College hosted its annual symposium on personalized equipment and tactics. The keynote speaker was Admiral Isabella Martinez Rodriguez, granddaughter of the corporal who'd once mocked Maya's modifications and great-niece of the sergeant major who'd become one of her strongest advocates. The principles that General Chen established, Admiral Martinez Rodriguez told the assembled audience of military leaders from around the world, have transformed not just how we think about equipment, but how we think about human potential itself. The symposium featured presentations on innovations that had emerged from Maya's original insight: medical equipment that adapted to individual physiological differences, weapon systems that accommodated varying physical capabilities, communication devices that worked with different cognitive processing styles, and tactical approaches that leveraged individual psychological strengths. But the most moving moment came when Dr. Rebecca Santos, the same Lieutenant Santos who'd worked with Maya at Phoenix, presented research showing that military units incorporating personalization principles suffered 60% fewer casualties and achieved mission objectives with 30% greater efficiency than traditionally equipped units. The lesson of General Chen's career, Dr. Santos concluded, is that individual authenticity and institutional effectiveness aren't just compatible, they're synergistic. When people are empowered to be their best selves, institutions become their best selves as well. In the audience, representatives from militaries around the world took notes on principles that had spread far beyond their original context. The Chen doctrine of equipment personalization had been adopted by police forces, emergency responders, and civilian security organizations. Medical schools taught courses on personalized surgical equipment. Engineering programs included modules on user-centered design that traced their origins to a young lieutenant's refusal to accept standard-issue limitations. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Maya's legacy was the simple fact that no one in the modern military found personalized equipment remarkable anymore. Pink scopes, custom-colored gear, individually modified equipment, all of it had become so normal that new recruits couldn't imagine a time when such things would have been controversial. The revolution had been so complete that it was no longer revolutionary.
The pattern was unmistakable once she saw it. The explosions, the apparent chaos, it was all designed to drive the base personnel toward the eastern bunkers, toward what they thought was safety. Maya had grown up in a small town outside Denver, where her father ran a gun shop and her mother taught high school physics. She'd been the girl who painted her rifle stock lavender for hunting trips, who wore rhinestone-studded combat boots to junior ROTC meetings, who refused to choose between femininity and firepower. Her parents had supported her unconventional approach, understanding that her love of pink and glitter didn't diminish her tactical mind or her shooting accuracy. But the military had been different. From day one at basic training, her fellow recruits had seen her gear modifications as a joke. The pink scope became a symbol of everything they thought was wrong with women in combat roles. "Pretty in pink won't save you in a firefight, Chen," Corporal Martinez had sneered during their first joint exercise. "This isn't a fashion show." The mockery had followed her through advanced training, through deployment, through every mission where she'd proven herself capable. They called her scope the makeup mirror. They asked if it came with matching lipstick. They questioned whether she was taking the job seriously. Now, crouched behind concrete as mortar rounds whistled overhead, Maya could see what standard equipment would have missed. The attacking force had positioned themselves in a crescent formation, using the base's own defensive positions against them. They were professional, organized, and definitely not the random insurgent group that intelligence had suggested. "Barnes, this is Chen," she said into her radio. "They've got us in a kill box. The eastern bunkers, it's a trap." Static answered her for a moment that stretched like eternity. Then, "Explain." Through her scope, she tracked movement patterns, counting muzzle flashes and estimating positions. "They're using suppressive fire to channel our people toward what looks like the safest route. But, sir, I can see heat signatures positioned along the eastern ravine. If we move the wounded and non-combatants that way, they'll be walking into an ambush." The base housed 89 people that night. Soldiers, contractors, medical staff, and a small group of embedded journalists. Most were now trapped in the central compound, taking cover wherever they could find it. Through the scope, Maya spotted movement near the motor pool. 3 figures in tactical gear moving too purposefully to be part of the defensive response. She adjusted the thermal settings, filtering out background heat to focus on human signatures. The figures were carrying something, packages that radiated unusual heat signatures. "Sir, we've got sappers near the vehicle depot. They're placing charges." The radio crackled with Barnes' response. "How many?" "3 confirmed, but sir, She swept the scope across the compound, her enhanced optics revealing details that would have been invisible to standard equipment. "This isn't random. They know our layout, our protocols. Someone gave them detailed intelligence." As if to underscore her point, an explosion erupted precisely at the base's primary communications array. The timing was too perfect, the placement too strategic. This wasn't luck or good reconnaissance. This was inside knowledge.
Maya's mind raced as she continued scanning. The pink scope that had made her a laughingstock was now revealing the truth of their situation. The attackers weren't just better organized than expected, they were operating with information that should have been classified. Someone had betrayed them. "Colonel Barnes, I need you to listen carefully. I can see the full picture from here, and it's worse than we thought, but I think I know how to get our people out." "I'm listening, Lieutenant." "We can't use the eastern route. It's compromised, but there's a blind spot in their formation, northwest, along the old supply road. My scope's picking up clear thermals in that direction. No hostile signatures for at least 200 meters. That road's been mined for months, Chin. Intelligence confirmed it." Maya adjusted her scope settings again, cycling through different filters. "Sir, I'm not seeing any buried heat sources along that route. Either the intelligence was wrong, or whoever's feeding them information wanted us to think it was mined." The radio silence that followed Maya's assessment stretched for 12 seconds, while explosions continued to light up the pre-dawn darkness. Through her pink scope, she watched heat signatures moving with military precision through positions that should have been unknown to any hostile force. "Chen," Barnes finally responded, "you're certain about that supply road?" "Sir, I've been monitoring it for 20 minutes. No buried heat sources, no movement, no indication of recent ground disturbance." All stations, Barnes's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Change of plans. Eastern route is compromised. All personnel prepare for northwest evacuation along the old supply road." The response was immediate and predictable. Maya heard doubt, confusion, and barely concealed frustration. They were being asked to abandon their most defensible position based on the assessment of a lieutenant whose judgment many had questioned for months. "Northwest route's been mined to hell," Martina's voice came through. "Intelligence confirmed it months ago." Maya keyed her radio. "Martinez, this is Chen. I'm looking at that route right now through thermal optics. No heat signatures indicating buried ordnance. Either the mining reports were wrong, or whoever's feeding them information wanted us to think it was mined." As the evacuation began, Maya noticed something that made her stomach tighten. One of the evacuees, Private Johnson from the supply section, was moving wrong. His heat signature was different, his posture too alert for someone following evacuation orders. "Barnes, we've got a problem. Johnson's not evacuating with the others. He's moving toward the communications array." "Johnson's our backup comms operator. He's probably trying to establish contact with headquarters." Maya adjusted her scope settings again, filtering the display to focus on Johnson's specific heat signature. "Sir, Johnson's carrying something. Heat signature suggests electronic equipment, but not standard radio gear." The implication hit them both simultaneously. Johnson wasn't trying to establish communications. He's the one who'd been compromising them. "All stations, detain Private Johnson immediately."
But Johnson had heard the transmission. Through her scope, Maya watched him abandon subtlety and begin running toward the communications array. He was carrying a device that would allow him to coordinate the final phase of the attack. "He's running," Maya reported, 200 meters from the comm array. "I can take the shot." "Chen, do you have a clean shot?" Maya centered the crosshairs on Johnson's moving form. At this range, with her modified equipment, it would be routine. But routine shots didn't usually involve ending the life of someone you'd served alongside. "Clean shot confirmed," Maya replied. "If he reaches that array, none of us are walking out of here," Barnes said grimly. Maya took a deep breath and made the decision that would define her career. The pink scope that had earned her months of ridicule was about to save 89 lives. The shot echoed across the compound, and Private Johnson fell 20 meters short of the communications array.
The single rifle shot that ended Johnson's betrayal seemed to pause the entire battle. Through her scope, Maya watched his heat signature fade as his body temperature dropped. The device he'd been carrying was clearly visible now, its electronic components still radiating heat. "Target down," Maya reported. "Johnson won't be coordinating anything." Through her enhanced optics, she could see the immediate effect on the attacking force. Their movement patterns changed from coordinated precision to confusion. Without their inside intelligence, they were operating blind. "Outstanding work, Chan." Barnes's voice carried relief and grim satisfaction. "First group, continue northwest evacuation." As the evacuation proceeded, Maya tracked the enemy's movements. They weren't just repositioning, they were retreating. The entire assault had been built around Johnson's betrayal. Without his coordination, they had no viable operational plan. Dr. Sarah Kim's voice cut through the radio chatter. "All wounded are secure and moving. Chen, I don't know how you spotted that route, but you saved lives tonight." "Ma'am, that's what the gear is for." As the last groups moved toward safety, Maya reflected on the irony. The equipment that had made her a target for ridicule had provided capabilities that standard gear couldn't match. Her willingness to be different, to trust her own judgment despite constant criticism, literally saved lives. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her position. "Chen, I've been in combat for 15 years, and I've never seen tactical intelligence gathering like what you did tonight. That scope of yours, whatever modifications you made, they work." Maya smiled for the first time since the attack began. "Sergeant, it's not just the scope. It's about having equipment that you trust completely, that you've customized to work exactly the way you need it to work." The lesson would resonate far beyond this single engagement.
Captain Walsh, who'd led the extraction team, interrupted. "Sir, the results speak for themselves. Lieutenant Chen's equipment provided intelligence that standard optics couldn't have gathered." Maya stood and approached her scope. "General Stone, the question isn't whether my modifications meet current specifications. The question is whether current specifications are adequate for the threats we're facing." She gestured toward the pink housing. "This equipment incorporates enhanced thermal filtering, improved resolution algorithms, and custom software I developed based on field conditions. The pink color isn't random. It provides better camouflage in desert environments while serving as a psychological tool." "Psychological tool?" Maya smiled slightly. "Sir, when people underestimate your capabilities based on appearances, they often reveal information they wouldn't otherwise share. The scope has been tactically useful, partly because enemies didn't perceive it as a serious threat." The room fell silent as the implications settled. Maya had turned mockery into operational advantage. Dr. Kim spoke from the side of the room. "The psychological factor worked internally as well. Lieutenant Chen's equipment provided intelligence that standard optics couldn't have gathered." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who'd been quiet throughout the briefing, finally spoke. "General Stone, I've been in the Army for 22 years. Lieutenant Chen's equipment is impressive, but that's not what makes her exceptional. What makes her exceptional is that she had the courage to trust her judgment even when everyone was telling her she was wrong." Lieutenant Colonel Barnes cleared his throat. "We've completed our investigation into Private Johnson's activities. He'd been providing intelligence to hostile forces for 3 months. The attack was just one operation in a broader effort. If Lieutenant Chen hadn't identified him, we could have been looking at coordinated attacks across multiple installations." The weight of that revelation settled over the room. Maya's split-second decision had prevented not just immediate massacre, but potentially dozens of other attacks. 2 years later, Captain Maya Chen stood before a class of junior officers at the Army's new Tactical Innovation Center. Her original pink scope was mounted behind her desk alongside dozens of other examples of successfully modified equipment. Equipment personalization isn't about self-expression. It's about optimizing the human-machine interface to achieve maximum tactical effectiveness. When your gear is truly tailored to your capabilities, you can perform at levels that seem impossible with standard equipment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but the ripple effects continued to expand. Military recruitment had improved as word spread that individual identity and institutional service were compatible. Innovation metrics across all equipment categories had improved dramatically. Most importantly, the culture of mockery had been replaced by curiosity and respect for different approaches. After class, Maya walked through the memorial garden established to honor the 89 survivors. The garden featured native plants from each person's home state, creating a living testament to the value of diversity within unity. A young private approached, carrying clearly modified equipment. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. You spoke at my basic training graduation. You said the military needs people who think differently. That changed how I approached my career." Maya studied the soldier's innovative gear. "What's your specialty?" "I've been integrating digital and physical surveillance capabilities. My equipment looks different because it has to do things standard equipment wasn't designed for." "And your supervisors?"
The private smiled. "They encourage innovation, ma'am. They say being underestimated can be our greatest tactical advantage." Maya realized the real victory hadn't been preventing a single attack or saving 89 lives, though those remained critically important. The real victory had been proving that institutions could evolve, that individual identity and collective effectiveness could enhance each other. 10 years later, General Maya Chen served as the Army's Chief Innovation Officer, reviewing applications for the Individual Excellence Awards. This year's nominees included innovations from every service branch and allied militaries worldwide. One application caught her attention, from Lieutenant Isabella Martinez, daughter of the corporal who'd once mocked Maya's modifications. Martinez had developed equipment for soldiers with sensory processing differences, extending Maya's principles in new directions. "The principle that guided my work came from studying General Chen's career," Martinez had written. She taught the military that effectiveness comes from matching equipment to individual capabilities, not forcing individuals to adapt to standardized equipment. Maya smiled. The next generation was building on principles she'd helped establish, extending them beyond anything she had imagined. Her assistant announced a call from Colonel Thompson at Walter Reed, Lisa, now a leading trauma surgeon. "Maya, we just completed surgery using equipment based on your modification principles. We saved a soldier who would have died with conventional tools. The personalized equipment made procedures possible that couldn't have been done otherwise." After the call, Maya reflected on the journey from mocked lieutenant to general whose innovations influenced military doctrine worldwide. The pink scope had become more than a tool. It had become a symbol that effectiveness and individuality could enhance each other in ways neither could achieve alone. 20 years after that dawn firefight, the principles Maya established had transformed military culture entirely. Her story was taught at service academies. Her innovations had spread to civilian applications, and personalized equipment had become so normal that new recruits couldn't imagine controversy around such things. The revolution had been so complete, it was no longer revolutionary. But Maya's true legacy wasn't in museums or textbooks. It was in the daily reality of a military that valued individual differences as sources of strength. Every soldier who modified their equipment, every leader who encouraged innovation, every person who refused to choose between authenticity and effectiveness carried forward the lesson of that pink scope. Sometimes, being underestimated really is the greatest tactical advantage of all. And sometimes, having the courage to be exactly who you are, despite what others expect, can literally save lives. Maya Chen had proven both truths that dawn morning, and in doing so had changed not just military doctrine, but the fundamental understanding of what it means to serve with both honor and authenticity. If Maya Chen's story of courage, authenticity, and tactical innovation resonated with you, we'd love to have you join our community of listeners who believe that being different isn't just acceptable, it's often essential.